Writers in Kyoto is a group that celebrates the culture of Kyoto with our speakers, our competitions, and our anthology. And we're very fortunate to have a speaker today who knows a rare information about Kyoto in the 1950s. Everybody has a different impression of the 1950s, but Hans Brinckmann, who was a young banker in the 1950s, who came here from Holland, his experience was filled with potters and Buddhist monks and writers, poets. And so we're very fortunate today to have him to tell us about this distant world. And so please warmly welcome Hans Brinckmann for coming and speaking today.
Well, quite a unique opportunity. Thank you, Paul, for your kind introduction and for organizing this little event here today. You know, it all began in Hokkaido. Not my stay in Japan, but this event. During the annual Japan Writers' Conference, which this year took place in Otaru on October 13 and 14 this past year. There, the translator of my work and my invaluable mentor, Hiromi Mizoguchi, who is here with me today, spoke to Juliet Carpenter about a possible lecture by me in Kyoto. And Juliet kindly introduced her to John Dougal. And he found Ryukoku University willing to host this event with Paul Carty as the organizer. So here we are, thanks to all four of you. Unfortunately, I don't see Juliet here. She said she would come, maybe she's delayed. Anyway, it is certainly a wonderful example of what we might call literary networking. Now, you want to hear about my experiences in Kyoto in the 1950s. To create the right mood, let me start off by reading to you the beginning of a letter, my letter to Kyoto, written in 1958 and published, let's see if this works, yeah. Published that year, 1958, in translation in a Japanese magazine. This is the original text that I wrote in 1958 on my typewriter at that time. A letter to Kyoto. 7 years long I have knocked on your doors and searched for your soul without finding it. Yesterday I rested, and what I had looked for was suddenly there. I did not find it as you would find a marble or a flower. I did not see it as you would see the moon or the ocean.
Sorry to interrupt. Okay.
Continue.
Please
Thank
continue.
you, welcome. I will just start again from, not from the very beginning, but from my letter to Kyoto, which I wrote in 1958 and was published that year in translation by a Japanese magazine. And this is the original scan, the scan of the original that I typed on a typewriter at that time, in 1958. A letter to Kyoto. 7 years long I have knocked on your doors and searched for your soul without finding it. Yesterday I rested, and what I had looked for was suddenly there. I did not find it as you would find a marble or a flower. I did not see it as you would see the moon or the ocean. It was seeing without object, and knowing without reason. In a moment that was too long or too short to be measured, I saw you with my inner eye, and you looked back and recognized me. The unwise say that cities are but dead heaps of stone and clay, but of you that is not true, Kyoto. You are blushing with life. I know, because I heard your breath in the pines of Nansenji. I felt your heartbeat in the corners of Kawaramachi. I saw your tears on the rocks of Shirakawa. You treasure within your folds the wisdom of a saint and the mystery of budding blossoms. Your autumn is not sad because it holds the seeds of spring. Ever changing, you are always the same. Guard your secrets well, Kyoto, but never bury them. Impart them to those who are worthy to receive them, to the poets that sing of your reserved beauty, to the maidens that are born to wear the kimono in your honor, to the men on the mountain that have conquered death. They understand your whispers and will live as you do. It goes on a bit more, but I'll stop now. This, dear audience, is what I felt about Kyoto in the 1950s. The full text was published in a Japanese magazine in a translation by a Kyoto poet friend, Shimaoka Kenseki. No, something is going wrong.
Let me bring it back.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I have to get used to this control. 12 years later, this same story, the same letter to Kyoto, was republished in the autumn of 1970 as the lead article in the inaugural issue of Kyoto, the old capital, an illustrated quarterly about the old capital, Kyoto. Here is the magazine. How did all this come about? Well, as one of the earliest and still surviving, barely, foreign arrivals in post-war Japan, I was lucky enough to be able to explore Kyoto's history and daily life in the 1950s. Tonight I want to share some of my memories of those bygone days, both in the context of my work at that time, in the Japan branches of a Dutch bank, and of my personal and social life, with a special emphasis on my experiences in Kyoto. It was an era so different from today's world, before reliable long-distance telephone, television, central air conditioning, fast trains, the internet, computers, mobile phones, and whatnot. That even I find it hard to believe that I actually did live and work in that dark age. First, a few personal details about my background. I was born in The Hague in February 1932 as the only son of a self-made businessman. In the late 1930s, my parents, my 4-year younger sister Sonja, and I moved to Wassenaar, a suburb of The Hague. And
If you just ask me, tell me when you want to turn it. I'll move it to the next side. Just say next. Sorry.
My sister and mother moved to a suburb at Wassenaar, near The Hague. And my parents were divorced in early 1940s. And fortunately, my mother met another man, Jan de Jong, who was an inspector of education in the pre-war Netherlands East Indies, now Indonesia. And he and his wife happened to be on home leave in Holland when Germany invaded the Netherlands in 1940, and therefore he could never go back. His wife died soon thereafter, and he became my stepfather. Shortly after the war, having survived the rigors of the Hunger Winter, or the winter of starvation, we, the four of us, moved to Amsterdam. At high school, I studied hard, with special interest in everything that had to do with language and literature. I wrote articles for and edited the school magazine, which was printed on a stencil machine. I even launched my own little publication, GAW, meaning a bit of everything, with contributions from my stepfather and several friends. I typed it on an old Remington typewriter, and with the help of carbon paper I could produce 10 or 12 copies. I wrote songs and composed music for it and acted in the school cabaret. It was clear what I wanted in life, to study language and literature, and after university develop a career as a writer. It turned out to be an impossible dream. There was no money for a higher education, and my efforts to obtain a scholarship failed. What's more, there was a fear that the Cold War would turn hot, that the Soviets would invade Western Europe. And my stepfather advised me to leave the Netherlands by finding a job with a bank with offices in Asia. So, after graduating from high school, at the tender age of 17, I was introduced to the Nationale Handelsbank, a Dutch bank established in 1863 with branches all over Asia. Together with still something not right. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. You're good.
Oh yeah. Together with 12 other young men, they took me on for a year-long internal staff training course in a villa in Bussum, not far from Amsterdam, a kind of private college. There we were given lectures in the morning, and then after lunch we traveled by bicycle and train to the head office in Amsterdam, where we got on-the-job training in the afternoons. Now, we were also instructed in 4 different sports. Tennis, to learn how to give and take. Horse riding, symbolizing control of the staff that we would in due course come out. Fencing, to deal with the competition. And swimming, to stay afloat under all circumstances. A year later, in July 1950, I boarded the ship called Oranje, which took me to my first posting in Singapore, followed 4 months later by a transfer to Japan. From Singapore I flew to Hong Kong, my first flying experience. It was a bumpy flight in a propeller-driven DC-6. And 2 days later I continued on from Hong Kong to Tokyo. The flight path stayed clear of the Korean peninsula because the Korean War had just broken out 6 months earlier. I was assigned to the Kobe branch, then located on the mezzanine of the Bank of Tokyo's office there, now the Kobe City Museum. When I reported for duty in December 1950, there was no desk available for me. Instead, I was assigned a little table previously used by a messenger boy, so-called boy-san, and it was there that I started my Japan banking career. 2 months later, the branch moved to a proper office, and I got a proper desk. My first home was the smaller of 2 bedrooms in a rather beautiful but cold Japanese house west of Kobe in Tarumi, with the larger one occupied by an older colleague at the bank. He charged me with the duty of lighting the single kerosene stove early in the morning before breakfast, half an hour before breakfast, so that the room would be heated up by the time we sat down for breakfast. I was to pay a full half share of the rent and all expenses, a tally of which he would keep. After this high-strung character had an angry fit, making him break a glass window pane, I decided to escape. And I moved to one of Kobe's old Kitano-cho early Meiji mansions, which had a room available for me. Kitano-cho Kobe. The first 2 years, my work was the main focus of my life. With after-work drinking with Dutch colleagues at the Kobe bars and nightclubs being the only relaxation. I also took lessons in Japanese, ignoring warnings of the branch's sub-manager that we should avoid trying to learn the local language, particularly kanji, as people have been known losing their mind over that. That was the guy. I ignored him. By early 1953, I started making short trips on my own. Before long, I discovered the charms and history of Kyoto. And I began to spend weekends there, walking the streets, visiting the temples, and getting to know local artists. I even went up to Mount Hiei, north of Kyoto, one snowy day. Once, as I was trying to buy a ticket for Kyoto at Kobe's Omiya station, in my limited Japanese, which was normally well understood, the clerk behind the window answered in a rough, raised voice, "No English." I patiently repeated my request in Japanese, mochiron, and this triggered another shout, "No English!" I went around the back to complain to the station master. He apologized, replacing the fellow at the window with someone else, and invited me to sit down. He noted down my complaint, and then got the ticket that I required. "He has been drinking very bad," he said, nodding in the direction of the offending clerk, who was now sitting sullenly in a corner. The station master got up and apologized again, and saw me to the door with a bow. The next day, the station master unexpectedly appeared in my office with his obnoxious clerk in town. The fellow, now the very image of contrition, was made to apologize with deep bows to me and Mr. Waimatsu, the chief clerk, our senior clerk, who was always on hand whenever a member of the Dutch staff got into a scrape. Their peace offering, a large box of cakes, was distributed among the staff. The reaction in the office to this rather embarrassing incident was very supportive, and I was once more made to feel that I belonged here. In 1954, I was transferred to Tokyo. And during my 2 years there, I sorely missed Kyoto's atmosphere and ancient culture. This is the old Tokyo station. This photo was taken in 1954. That was the Marunouchi, our old, it's all gone now. That was the entrance to my office, and that was my boss. In February 1956, I left for Holland on my first home leave. After 6 years' service, without official holidays, I was entitled to a 6 months vacation. Too long by any standard. It would also turn out to be financially disastrous. Our normal salary was suspended for the length of this home leave and replaced by a monthly stipend, which the wags claimed was barely enough to keep your mother in flowers and your father in cigars. The point was that your parents had to put you up and feed you, as you could not possibly afford a hotel or even a pension on that meager handout. Well, to my immense relief, I was reassigned to Japan, this time as sub-manager in the Osaka branch, deputy to the branch manager, Evert Veldhuizen. As business had shifted more and more from Kobe to Osaka, our main branch in the Kansai was transferred to Osaka. I rented the 3-room Western-style wing of a fine Japanese house in Ashiya, which was, as we all know, an attractive suburb halfway between Osaka and Kobe. I had found a housekeeper, Komatsubara-san, a kindly soul and a devout Christian who tried to lure me into her church, but I was firmly uninterested. She promised to keep praying for me anyway. The house was fully furnished in Art Deco style, fashionable when the house was built in the early 1930s. I never met my landlord and then landlady. They were ensconced in the main house behind a tall fence surrounding the garden to which I had no access. Many a Saturday and Sunday I spent in Kyoto, where I visited the temples. At Tofukuji, a major Rinzai Zen temple and monastery, I became friendly with a senior monk. After a few visits, he confided to me that he suffered from stomach ulcers and rotting teeth. He put this down to Shojin Ryori, the monastic diet consisting mostly of boiled turnip and potatoes, rice gruel, soybeans,